The Israel-Palestine-Lebanon conflict in 2024 has evolved into a major regional crisis, involving a complex web of historical grievances, ideological clashes, and geopolitical rivalries. It represents not just a continuation of decades of hostilities but also a significant turning point that could reshape the entire Middle East. Understanding the current situation requires a deep dive into its origins, recent developments, and the potential future scenarios that could unfold if immediate and long-term strategic solutions are not implemented. Historical background. The origins of the Israel-Palestine-Lebanon conflict date back to the early 20th century, during the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent establishment of the British Mandate in Palestine. The period was marked by competing nationalistic aspirations between the Jewish and Arab communities. The 1917 Balfour Declaration, in which Britain expressed support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, set the stage for a century of turmoil. Jewish immigration, driven by Zionist aspirations and European anti-Semitism, further fueled tensions between the two communities. With the end of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust revealed, global sympathy for the Jewish cause surged, resulting in increased pressure for the establishment of a Jewish state. In 1947, the United Nations proposed the partition of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, which the Jewish community accepted but the Arab leadership rejected. This led to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which resulted in Israel expanding its territory significantly beyond the UN partition plan, while hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, creating a refugee crisis that continues to affect the region today. For the Palestinians, this event, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, has become a cornerstone of their national identity and their ongoing struggle for statehood. The aftermath of the 1948 war set the stage for continued Arab-Israeli hostilities. A series of wars in 1956, 1967, and 1973 further entrenched the conflict. The Six-Day War in 1967 was particularly transformative, as Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. These territorial gains remain central to the current conflict, with both Israelis and Palestinians claiming rights over the land. The war also led to the emergence of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which became the leading body representing Palestinian national aspirations. In Lebanon, the 1982 Israeli invasion to expel the PLO from its southern bases led to the rise of Hezbollah, a Shia militant group supported by Iran. Hezbollah has since grown into a formidable political and military force, deeply embedded in Lebanese society and politics. Over the years, it has become Iran's most important proxy, serving as a deterrent against Israeli attacks and a key player in the broader axis of resistance that includes Iran, Syria, and various Iraqi and Yemeni militias. The modern conflict in 2024. The conflict reached a critical juncture in September 2024, with the assassination of Hezbollah's Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, in an Israeli airstrike. Nasrallah, who had led Hezbollah since 1992, was a pivotal figure in the group's transformation from a small militia into a powerful paramilitary and political entity. His death sent shockwaves throughout Lebanon and the broader Shia world, creating a power vacuum that has further destabilized the region. In response, Hezbollah launched an unprecedented barrage of rockets at northern Israeli cities, marking the most significant escalation since the 2006 Lebanon War. Israel, in turn, launched Operation Northern Storm, a large-scale military campaign aimed at neutralizing Hezbollah's military infrastructure and preventing further attacks. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have targeted command and control centers, rocket launching sites, and supply routes throughout southern and central Lebanon, inflicting heavy casualties on Hezbollah's forces. The escalation has not been limited to Lebanon. In Gaza, Hamas has seized the opportunity to launch its own offensive, targeting southern Israeli cities with rocket barrages. This two-front conflict has stretched Israel's military resources and raised fears of a broader regional war. The IDF is now engaged in a high-stakes balancing act, conducting intensive airstrikes on Gaza while preparing for a potential ground invasion of southern Lebanon. Regional dynamics and strategic interests. The current conflict is not merely a localized confrontation but a reflection of broader regional power struggles, particularly between Israel and Iran. Tehran's support for Hezbollah and Hamas is part of its strategy to expand its influence in the Levant and counterbalance Israeli and US power in the region. Through its axis of resistance, Iran has cultivated a network of allied militias in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, positioning itself as a formidable regional power. While Iran has refrained from direct intervention in the current conflict, it has provided logistical and financial support to both Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran's calculus is driven by a desire to avoid a direct confrontation with Israel, which could lead to a broader war and jeopardize its own security. However, if Israel escalates its military operations in Lebanon or targets Iranian assets in Syria, Tehran could be drawn into the conflict, raising the stakes significantly. Syria, under the Assad regime, is another critical player. Damascus has so far remained on the sidelines, but its role as a conduit for Iranian arms and fighters makes it a potential flashpoint. The Assad regime, weakened by years of civil war, is heavily reliant on Iranian and Russian support. Any Israeli expansion of the conflict into Syria would likely draw in Syrian forces, potentially creating a new front. The Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have adopted a cautious stance. While they have normalized relations with Israel through the Abraham Accords, they remain wary of becoming directly involved. The Gulf monarchies view Hezbollah and Hamas as Iranian proxies and are concerned that a prolonged conflict could strengthen Iran's position in the region. At the same time, they face domestic political constraints, as public opinion in the Arab world remains largely sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Turkey, under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has sought to position itself as a champion of Palestinian rights. While Turkey's support for Hamas is well known, its relations with Israel have fluctuated, reflecting Erdogan's pragmatic approach to foreign policy. Turkey's involvement adds another layer of complexity, as it could potentially use its influence to mediate between the warring parties or escalate the situation further by providing more direct support to Palestinian factions. The United States, traditionally the most influential external actor in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, faces a difficult balancing act. The Biden administration has reiterated its support for Israel's right to defend itself but has also called for restraint to prevent a broader war. The US has significant strategic interests in the region, including its alliances with Israel and several Arab states, as well as its efforts to contain Iranian influence. A full-scale war would complicate US policy in the Middle East, potentially drawing American forces into the conflict and destabilizing the region further. Russia, with its military presence in Syria and close ties to Iran, also has a significant stake in the outcome of the conflict. Moscow has sought to position itself as a mediator, calling for a ceasefire and offering to host peace talks. However, Russia's ability to influence events on the ground is limited by the deep-seated hostilities and the complex web of alliances in the region. China, on the other hand, has adopted a more cautious approach. Beijing's primary interest in the Middle East is economic, particularly in ensuring the stability of energy supplies. While China has called for restraint and dialogue, it has avoided taking a direct role in the conflict, preferring instead to focus on its Belt and Road Initiative and maintaining good relations with all sides. The humanitarian toll of the conflict has been devastating. In Lebanon, over 500,000 civilians have been displaced, and entire towns have been destroyed. The Lebanese government, already weakened by years of political paralysis and economic collapse, is struggling to respond to the crisis. The destruction of key infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and power plants, has left large parts of the country without electricity and clean water. The United Nations and international aid organizations have called for a ceasefire to allow for the delivery of humanitarian assistance, but their efforts have been hampered by the ongoing hostilities. In Gaza, the situation is equally dire. The ongoing blockade, combined with relentless Israeli airstrikes, has left hundreds of thousands of civilians without access to basic necessities and killed over 40,000 civilians, including women and children. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and the health system has already collapsed. The psychological toll on Gaza's population, particularly children, is severe. Years of living under blockade and repeated military operations have created a generation suffering from trauma, anxiety, and depression. Israel continues to kill children, while the rest of the world silently watch. On the other hand, Hezbollah retaliates on the northern side of Israel, that has caused significant disruptions. Hezbollah's rocket attacks have killed over 150 Israeli and forced tens of thousands to evacuate their homes. Schools and businesses in the north have been shut down, and the constant threat of rocket fire has taken a toll on the population. The future of the conflict is highly uncertain. Several scenarios could unfold, depending on the actions of the involved actors and the international community's response. One possibility is a protracted low-intensity conflict, with periodic skirmishes and ceasefires. Another scenario is a full-scale regional war, which could involve multiple state and non-state actors and lead to catastrophic casualties and widespread destruction. A third scenario involves a temporary ceasefire brokered by international actors, allowing for humanitarian aid and limited negotiations. However, it is very unlikely, without addressing the underlying issues, such as the continuation of Israeli occupation of the Palestinian lands and aggression. A fourth possibility is that Hezbollah, weakened by Nasrallah's death and heavy losses, could opt for a strategic retrenchment, focusing on rebuilding its capabilities for a future conflict. The most dangerous scenario is the complete collapse of the Lebanese state, which would create a power vacuum that could be exploited by extremist groups, leading into further destabilization in Syria and Iraq. Such a collapse would lead to a massive refugee crisis, potentially overwhelming neighboring countries and creating new security threats. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah has triggered a dangerous escalation that threatens to engulf the entire region in a broader war. The conflict's complexity, involving not only Israel and Hezbollah but also Iran, Syria, and a host of Palestinian factions, makes it one of the most intricate and volatile crises in the Middle East. The international community must act swiftly to prevent further escalation and address the underlying issues that have fueled the conflict for decades. A comprehensive peace settlement will require more than just diplomatic negotiations. It will require a fundamental rethinking of the region's security architecture and the willingness to engage with all relevant actors, including non-state groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. Without a concerted effort to address the root causes of the conflict, including the status of Palestinian statehood, the disarmament of Hezbollah, and Iran's influence in the region, the cycle of violence is likely to continue, with devastating consequences for the people of Lebanon, Israel, Gaza, and the broader Middle East.